remarks. We will now allow questions from the media, and we start with Mr. Hilbert Har from stmartinnews.com.
Good morning. Prime Minister, what is the justification for giving the lottery company My Lucky Day 2.1 million guilders in license fees that they don't have to pay, and can other gambling companies like casinos look forward to the same treatment?
What is the justification? I would have to pass on an answer for that. I read something about it, about a forgiving being done to a particular lottery company. I don't have the exact details on it. I would have to check that out and see exactly what was the issue. I know there were, I don't know if it's this specific case, I know there was a request, and as there were other requests earlier in the year for companies that had a license but never operated, never used the license. But because of having the license, they accumulated fees that had to be paid. And at a certain moment when assessed for those fees, made a request substantiated by argumentation that they did not use the license and asked for forgiveness of payment, kwijtschelding van betaling for those fees. I would assume that is one of the situation that we are talking about, but I would have to check it out further before I can give details on that.
Thank you. Alita Singh of the Daily Herald.
Thank you, Giselle. Good morning, both Minister Postman, Prime Minister Postman, Minister Jacobs. Prime Minister Postman, the Integrity Chamber, of course, a lot is, the law itself, a lot has been talked about it, having it in place, what the Dutch government has as a condition. I think what has been lost in all of the noise is what exactly is the three most salient bits of this law and how it's going to affect us and our daily life.
I would believe that everyone in Samana would be able to dream about the Integrity Chamber. We've been fighting about it for such a long time. I would refrain from going into the detail of the law at this particular point for the simple reason, like I said, the legislation is now at Parliament, and it has to be debated in Parliament. And I will leave that to the parliamentarians in discussing the thing with the legislation. The concept of the Integrity Chamber is one that has changed during the process from the first draft. You know, we know the history, going to being sent up by the Ombudsman to the Constitutional Court. Parts of it was declared unconstitutional. It was redrafted. But basically, it is like a watchdog on integrity issues where those type of issues would be investigated. It's not a penal code something, because if prosecution would have to take place, it would still have to be, that would have to be done by the Solicitor General, so it would have to be sent to the Open Bar Ministry, to the public prosecution. But it's basically addressing integrity issues. I would say let us wait until the debate starts in Parliament. It can be very interesting, and I think then all parties should definitely know what is in the law and be clear about it.
Mr. Andrew Dick, the Daily Herald.
Yes, good morning to the ministers. Prime Minister Bosman, concerning the, some would call it the post-Irma syndrome, as far as the violent behaviors of residents. I'm not sure if you've taken note of the different violent crimes that has been going on. Switching the cap to the Justice Ministry now, your thoughts concerning that?
I'm very concerned about it. You know, after Irma, almost all of the discussions has been on projects and financing monies and building roofs, etc., etc. And there's that unseen damage that took place. And I have said that in from the beginning in one of the previous press briefings. And if I'm not mistaken, the Minister of Education has also touched base on that. The human aspect and the traumatic effect that the storm would have on people. I know of cases within my ministry, for example, of employees. I know of one mother with 2 small children, and the house in which they were living was totally ravished. You could imagine kids screaming, etc. My son, for instance, Hurricane Lois, his son is a big man now, and when he hears the word hurricane mentioned, he goes berserk because of the experience at that time as a child, what he experienced. What we are seeing, and in the Justice Ministry, with the assistance that we have requested from the Dutch police, for instance, we have now approved assistance up to the 5th of January and have requested to prolong that, and if all the way down to the summer, if possible. Why? You have folks who have been affected by the damages and the experience that they had in their homes. Some of them, on top of that, would be losing their jobs. You name it, the cars are damaged. Do you have insurance? Do you not have insurance? All of those emotions could make it that the best of person at a certain moment would snap in a situation that they normally would remain cool. You're going to have in traffic, you're going to have where there's an increase in road rage. You're going to have the violent crimes. Yesterday there was a stabbing. Someone was killed. The argumentation supposedly, allegedly, was pertaining to a parking lot. People are tensed, and we need to be able to concentrate on those areas and do something about that to provide the necessary care and counseling, and have that available for the folks. So yes, it does have my attention, and I consider it a major problem. I consider it just as important, if not more important, than fixing a roof.
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Lyndon Brown of BCN News.
Question to Honorable Prime Minister Bosman. Okay, the king have visited St. Martin on Saturday, and you got the experience of greeting the king. The king seemed to have very much interest in St. Martin. What the message did you get from the visit of the king?
First of all, I think both majesties, the king and the queen, showed to be totally sincere in their concerns as to the situation of St. Martin and the people of St. Martin. You know, the king stands above politics, and this last visit was specially aimed at speaking to the people who were affected by the hurricane and those who are providing the aid. I indeed had the opportunity to be along with them during the day, and no matter where they stopped, and they were very sincere and concerned of the issues. But one thing was made me feel good, having lived through it and have to deal with the aftermath of it and all of the confusion that the aftermath has caused. The king was very optimistic. The king was very optimistic about the resilience of the people of St. Martin. The king was very impressed with what has been done up to now to bring this island back. Because if you will listen to the press report, one would believe that absolutely nothing has been done, that you had a government sitting there twirling their thumbs and not doing anything back. All of my colleagues on the Council of Ministers have worked 24/7 from the day the hurricane hit up to present, right? And we just hear the report of the minister with the pavilions for schools. Our schools were back up and running in no time. If we compare, the hurricane did not only hit St. Martin, the hurricane hit different countries. One among others, Puerto Rico, for instance, which is a U.S. dependency, etc. And if you compare the speediness of our recovery, and mind you, I'm not saying, absolutely not saying that we are there. Far from that. St. Martin has some serious issues to deal with, and it's going to take a while before we are totally back up and running. But I want to feed from the sincereness and the positive approach that the royal couple showed while on St. Martin in us moving forward. And I think it's about time that we do just that. It's about time that we stop throwing rocks at each other and look at what we need to do and do it together. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Hilbert, you have the next question.
Yes, Prime Minister, once Parliament approves the Integrity Chamber law, there is still a period of 6 weeks for the Ombudsman to review the legislation. Are your Dutch counterparts, relevant counterparts, aware of that part of the process, and how will that influence the release of the recovery funds?
Hilbert, what do you think? After former minister, Minister Plasterk, indicated to be totally, disappointed and even angry because he was not aware that process had to take place. Don't forget, we already had that process. I don't think that there's anyone, this story about St. Martin Integrity Chamber was not limited to the Caribbean part of the kingdom and the European part of the kingdom. We were all over the world with it. When I attended the pledging conference in New York, everybody knew what was going on and what the argumentations was about. So I don't believe that anyone in The Hague or wherever can now say that they don't know what the process is. We have a legislative process that is laid down in our Constitution, and that is a process that we have to follow. And I understand the urgency that we have, but we have to follow the legislative process that is laid down into our Constitution. And that's why I caution those who, I would say, create the impression that a piece of legislation would reach Parliament today, it's finalized today, and tomorrow we can have recovery. We owe the people to be open and sincere and let them know exactly what is going on. That is the sole reason why I come here and sit at these briefings, so that we inform the public adequately. So, yes, to answer your question, I don't think that there's anyone who can say that they don't know what that procedure is. If they don't, they can send my office a request, and I would be glad to spell it out for them.
Alita?
Thank you, Giselle. Prime Minister, on the release of the 550 million euros, the World Bank is so far the chosen organization to basically manage that fund. And of course, the World Bank doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to what happens after they step into a country, especially one that's in a situation like ours after a disaster. Are you happy with the choice of the World Bank, and do you think that that will hamper the recovery process, or do you think it will actually help it to go faster?
No, it's not, I believe that prior to, you have to have clear agreements, clear discussions. While in New York, I sat with representatives of the World Bank to try to get a feedback of how they work. It has to do a lot with you have a situation where you have the donor country, in this case that would be the Netherlands. The Netherlands is putting up the funds, and the World Bank, so there's that type of arrangement between the Netherlands and the World Bank, and then you will have the World Bank vis-a-vis the country where the projects are being executed. And that is the relation between St. Martin and the World Bank. Now, it has to be clear, for instance, up front, what are the conditions? You can, and that is something that we have been saying from the very beginning. If you come with all of the bureaucracies in the world, and other Caribbean countries have mentioned this at the pledging conference, there are a lot of donor organizations, and oftentimes you hear that the countries could not have made use of the funds because the conditions, and now I'm not talking conditions like integrity chamber and border control, but the conditions to be able to submit a project are so impossible and bureaucratic that these countries with limited resources would not be able to qualify. That is one of the key issues of the discussions. That is why on St. Martin level also, and this was put in the interim report of the National Recovery Plan Work Group, and that is an organization has to become on St. Martin and structured on St. Martin, preferably loose from the regular organization that would be dealing with this project. If you see the Netherlands, they have a director general. That is outside of the regular Dutch government, right? They created the post of director general to be dealing with the recovery. On St. Martin, you have a head of mission, okay? So they put an organization in place to be dealing with this, loose from their day-to-day affairs. St. Martin has to do the same. St. Martin should not combine. We have limited resources, and this is a minimum of 2-year project that would be taking place. I don't see where there should be any delays because of the structure and operational methods of the World Bank. But the discussions, and with a working conference that is starting next week, by which the senior civil servants, ministers come and go, especially on St. Martin. But the senior civil servants, they stay, and they have to guarantee the continuity. And that is where, I won't repeat that. And that is where the discussions and the agreements have to be clear as to how you're going to proceed.
Andrew?
Yes, Minister Jacobs, concerning education, teachers, how are we, do we have a shortage? I know that after Irma, quite a number of teachers left the island. How are we looking? Do you have any figures as yet?
Well, the figures, thank you, Andrew, that I received last did show, and I mentioned it. The last time I received figures, I did come to the press briefing with it. Since then, I haven't had an update in terms of numbers, but I have had several teachers who are new, returned to the island, locals, or who had finished USM and continue to work because they actually hadn't found a job in the teaching field, which I find strange, seeing as we have to import teachers. So there were several teachers, as well as I mentioned before, that in the interim, while in the transition period, because even though we had teachers that left, we also had students that left. So it sort of was balanced out. Where teachers were missing, some student care coordinators and or principals were filling in, especially in the elementary schools. The secondary schools that indicated a need, they were in discussions with their counterparts in the Netherlands or wherever else to get teachers in. But I think we will only get a good picture of our proper needs post after Christmas, because many of the students will then be coming back who had still opted to stay instead of breaking up the rest of their school year. They opted to get their report cards, that first report card for the first term. So several are returning in December, and then January will give us a new picture. So in advance of that, we have been asking the school boards to make the necessary preparations, and so far, my office has not received an alarm as to we're not going to be able to service the students who are there. And as Minister Boseman, you'd also asked a question about the violence on St. Martin. Our students are also exhibiting higher levels of violence. The Education Care Center, which had been scheduled to start in October, was severely damaged. In the initial assessments, since 1, 2, 3, we just had a meeting, and as a matter of fact, updating on that with the 2 entities within the ministry that were working on that, which was Student Support Services and Public Education Division. The staffing had been completed. They are currently assisting in the schools, so meeting the needs within the schools, not necessarily outside of the school the way we had planned. So the student care coordinator, the coordinator herself is working with current schools, trying to alleviate the situations at the schools. We had 2 teachers and 2 teachers' assistants. They are assisting in the current schools right now. So that is also helping us to meet the need of where teachers were missing. You have the regular sick leave issues. You have the regular pregnancy leave issues, which with having a 98% female population happens quite often. So they are actually meeting a need, and now the planning is being looked at that we've gotten the initial start off and materials in. We're looking at how we can get the ECC still back on track by January, by mid-January. So then we'll be also meeting the needs of those students with the extra care in a smaller group. The SSSD continues to lend its support. The care teams are doing their work, not only with the teachers, with the students, but continuously also updating if teachers need to get that help, because teachers can get frustrated as well, especially dealing with classrooms of children who, you're dealing with a situation, of course, you're happy to start. Some of the schools lost their fans. Thanks to the IMA, we were able to, 2 weeks ago, also give them fans. And they're slowly getting the stuff. But even when you have everything that you need, you have to be able to deal with yourself. So again, teachers have to be able to, and people of St. Martin have to be able to look at themselves in the mirror and say, how am I coping? And decide whether they need to get help from third parties, because even the person that appears the calmest, as Minister Boseman said, you can snap quickly, and Minister will be able to tell you that even ministers have been displaying post-traumatic stress syndrome. We're flipping off a little quicker than usual. I mean, of course, dealing with the transition, that when is it going to happen? You have all this work to do. You don't know whether you're coming or going, especially within departments, you have that as well. So to the general public also, I'm asking you to have patience when you come to offices and there's a long line and you need help. So it will require patience and tolerance from us all. And people in a situation should be able to just say, you know what, I can't right now. I need a few minutes. And even if you're in a line and the person who's serving you needs a few minutes, that you can think for yourself, this person is dealing with this all day. So it can be tough, and allow that person, whether it is to take a walk and come back, drink water, use the bathroom, and regroup. Sometimes that's all it's needed. So general public of St. Martin, teachers, schools, managers, people in general, assess yourselves. We do have professionals. We had looked at bringing in more psychoprofessional help. In the initial phase, it wasn't necessary, but I think moving into 3 months and beyond, that that project definitely will see fruition, because they are just standing by. And I can see this as one of the projects that are low-hanging fruit, where we can bring in some psychosocial persons to assist with assisting those who are in need in schools, in justice, even the ones who in VSA have to deal with aid recipients, etc., those out in the field, and the general public.
Thank you. And our final question goes to Mr. Brown.
Okay, our final question to Minister Jacob. Education is your priority. Now, the University of St. Martin wasn't in the recovery plan. Who are responsible to straighten out the problem that the university is facing now?
Before going forward, can you clarify what you mean by not in the recovery plan?
Because the University of St. Martin is a foundation, and they are not qualified to get funds. That's what they have told me.
I think you have a misunderstanding. What I have said in previous press briefings is that we as government could take a decision to make a budget amendment for emergency relief, for roof repair, for school repair, for school materials, for what else did we do? Food for the people, to extend the amount of social assistance that we're giving in the budget, because we know as a result of this, these are our responsibilities. With the education recovery team, as soon as Hurricane Irma had passed and we could meet with the stakeholders, the University of St. Martin was a part of all of those stakeholder meetings. The University of St. Martin was taken up in the assessments. The University of St. Martin was taken up in the status of teachers and the status of students, etc. It was only when the University of St. Martin declared on October 3rd in the public and to the ministry on the 2nd that they would close by October 30th is when the situation changed. The university also received assistance from the Marines to get their quick fixes moving. They had actually one of the schools with the least amount of damage and could restart immediately. So being part of the recovery plan as such, I'm not sure what you mean by that. They were definitely part of the assessment of needs, etc. The National Sports Institute, the University of St. Martin, the John Lamedy Center, the library, all of these entities receive subsidy from government. School subsidies are based on an ordinance specifically for schools, elementary and secondary. The ordinance for higher education is in process. So the university's contention is that they are not under such a subsidy, and as such, government isn't fully responsible for them. They receive a subsidy via the regular ordinance for subsidies. And via that, they also had a standing agreement which was signed in 2014, as had been signed with previous ministers and commissioners of education before, to ensure that accreditation take place, etc., the quality of education is maintained, that university lives up to its obligation to report on the quality, on the staff, on the students, etc., etc. What I can say is that based on the fact that they are not regulated via an ordinance specific for higher education, and prior to Hurricane Irma, government was not 100% responsible for the financing of it, we couldn't just consider their loss of donors as an emergency as such. That's the only difference. However, government has remained committed to try to meet the needs of the university to be able to provide them the assistance they needed to remain open. As such, I reiterated, October, when school was supposed to restart, because they had already started in August, as they claimed, up to when the hurricane hit, they had not provided us with an invoice to pay for the students that go to university who have received study financing. So that amount would have amounted to close to 250,000 guilders. USM was requesting 250,000 guilders per month to start. In our view as government, they could have started with that injection that they would have gotten as per old funds for students, and then we would have had the time to regulate what else could have happened. However, the university, based on their financial obligations, which have not been made clear to us as to why they could not meet their financial needs by the end of October, even foreseeing that there would be 200,000+ guilders coming in from government's coffers, even though foreseeing that 13, 14 bad financial statements, though unaudited, we initially agreed to pay them out another 130,000+. Things could have been ongoing all now, and these conversations would have been ongoing all now in terms of being back up and running and how can we sustain you now. It's a different story. They did not restart. Some programs got to restart with the UVI at USM program. Not all the students qualified to do that, and that was my major concern, especially in presenting the proposal last week. So even though the higher education ordinance isn't done, it's in process. We're hoping to have that done by the end of 2018. It is still a hope because, as Minister Bosman said, there is a process to follow. Yezet and Way Legal Affairs has to do their vetting, and they're the ones telling us they cannot promise it prior to that. So as much as it's our priority, there are several priorities within government for legislation that Legal Affairs has to work on. So we will continue to hope that the proposal that we have made will bear fruits for the university students and staff, and that we can proceed to have a university fully functioning within short.